robust and candid conversation about this proposal. Um, it's one that we've put together for your consideration, and it is indeed a proposal. And we want it to be informed by the thoughts, comments, and observations of the subcommittee members and others who are in attendance and who may speak upon it later. So we're trying to get as much input as we can to land in the correct place as best as we can, realizing that it's unlikely based on what we all know that we're going to please everyone, but we're going to endeavor to do what's appropriate for our mission and this D&I effort that we've put together. So first, I'd like to get uh, approval of the minutes from the April 15, 21 meeting. You received those with the materials that you received from Leonore. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to review those. Can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Seconded.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussions, corrections of the meetings? Are hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? And since we're a smaller group, I'm going to try to just use the voice vote instead of going to the poll that we can take. All right. So with that, as you recall from the last meeting, there was some discussion, and by the end of the meeting, which ended kind of abruptly, as we all know, there was consensus as I understood it, and I believe the committee acknowledged that we should proceed with the preparation of a diversity statement for consideration and submission to the Issues Committee, along with the recommendations that we're ultimately going to make to the Issues Committee as well. And so we have put together this for your consideration. And I wanted to just start by getting some candid thoughts and observations about the diversity statement and pros, cons, observations. I know there's a lot of folks who may not agree with some of the language in here, but I want to hear from this committee today about where we believe we should go and where we should end up. So I want to open the floor up to start discussion on this proposed diversity statement, and I do want to have a candid and robust conversation. And if you guys are not anxious in volunteering, I may start calling on some folks to get the discussion going, quite frankly. So the floor is open. Dorothy, floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I think the statement is great, and I like it a lot. The only change that I would request would be, I'm trying to pull it, have it on my double screen, is instead of just having equality, changing that to equity. So where it has North Carolina State Bar considers diversity and inclusion essential elements in promoting equality, I would say, propose us changing that to promoting equity and preventing discrimination, as opposed to just equality, because equity is far more encompassing and it goes far more in depth than equality. And we want to achieve equity as opposed to just equality. And we probably, with that being said, we'll want to include, since it looks like we have other definitions in here, diversity encompasses, inclusion means this, and we may want to include a statement about what equity is.
As usual, you are ahead of us. We've talked about the fact that in this day and age, a lot of leaders in this space, a lot of organizations do indeed use the phrase diversity, equity, and inclusion, as you've pointed out. And that's something that I intended to raise with the committee as well today. And you've put it on the table already. And I think it's an appropriate observation, and it may go to how we actually title this statement as opposed to a diversity and inclusion statement, which I think is what, at least in some respects, I had been laboring under the impression that's how we would title it. But as I've read more and thought more about it and talked to some folks, that may be something that we should consider. So great observation, and certainly something that we will consider fully. So taking these one at a time, and I'm trying to get some consensus today as best as I can. You've heard the observation from Dorothy about incorporating the notion of equity into this statement, and we will go back. We're not going to wordsmith it on the fly. We will take notes today and go back and revise it and come back with another proposal based on the input that we received today. But what's the subcommittee's pleasure with respect to what Dorothy has just suggested? Catherine, your hand's up.
Well, I didn't want to answer that question. I kind of want to put a pin in that. It's not that I have any terrible, great thought about it. I guess I'm trying to understand in a way the context of the statement. Who's saying it and to whom? I think that would help me better determine, revisions and things of that nature.
Yeah, folks can chime in. My understanding is this is going to be the diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity and inclusion statement adopted by the bar. That is going to be its statement to the world, so to speak. It will go on its website, and it will be the statement that the state bar has adopted for basically acknowledging that diversity and inclusion is going to be part of the fabric of the institution going forward.
And so does that mean that we are theoretically speaking on behalf of every lawyer in North Carolina?
I don't interpret it that way. I interpret it as the bar itself saying this is the statement of the bar as the organization or institution. Not, I mean, obviously there's some issues with trying to speak for every lawyer, but I think it is the statement that the state bar itself as an institution has decided to consider and ultimately recommend for adoption by the powers that be, whoever they may be. Alice, I'm going to speak up if that's different than how we should be proceeding. Marcy's on, and John certainly on, others. Alice, your thoughts on that?
So Todd, I agree with you. I do think, the council's a representative body. So I'm presuming that this would be presented ultimately to the council. Right. So in some ways, Catherine is making a good point, because the councilors represent their constituents, and, adopting it as the body is a way of making a statement on behalf of the membership. So it's kind of both things at once in my mind. But that's true of the rules of professional conduct.
That's right. Ted, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Todd. Yeah, I mean, I am in lockstep with Dorothy on this. I think equity is a better word that we should include. It should be our goal. I guess the other thing, as far as, I don't know if you only want to talk about this or if you want general impressions about the statement still.
Well, I want to talk about whatever you want us to consider at this point. We're taking notes, and we can circle back and certainly have a discussion about anything else that's already been raised and what you're about to raise also.
Okay. All right. So the thing in mind is probably a more minor point than Dorothy's, but just the first sentence in the statement talks about our oath to defend both the U.S. and the North Carolina Constitution. And then in the second sentence, we only talk about the North Carolina Constitution, talking about all persons being created equal and having inalienable rights. And I believe that's in the U.S. Constitution as well. And so I guess I was wondering, should we also say that both the U.S. and North Carolina constitutions speak to those issues? Or if there was a reason why we started out referring to both constitutions and then we narrow it.
Okay. Good point. There's no specific reason. There's no reason why we can't broaden it. I guess one way of looking at it was that the U.S. Constitution is sort of overarching, as you well know. And in my mind, we're sort of like a funnel approach. We sort of start out with everything, and then we because the state bar is a state institution and not a federal institution, tying back the state bar statement to the North Carolina Constitution, realizing that it is certainly overlaid by the U.S. Constitution. But I don't have any objection with trying to rephrase this so that we make sure that it's clear that we're referring to both as we talk about this statement. And certainly we can take that down as an observation and input from the committee and incorporate that into the next iteration. Others want to chime in on what Ted has just raised? I'm trying to get the sense of the body as we go along here.
I just want to clarify, Ted, for my understanding. Are you asking that we add the language about the U.S. Constitution, or
Yes.
if we're going to reference the Constitution, make sure we include that federal language as well?
Right. I'm asking
It's a good
that.
idea to do both.
Yeah, I would like the second sentence to reference both, just because I think it makes it stronger.
And then go ahead, Leonore.
No, I was just saying thank you to Ted.
And then if you revise sentence 2 to include or address both, what about sentence 3 that also follows? Ted?
Right. I mean, I think that all of those, that whole kind of what I would call preamble of the statement, I think it should refer to both constitutions since we started that way.
Your suggestion is that the first 3 sentences all refer to the U.S. and North Carolina constitutions. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Todd, let me jump in. I agree totally with Ted. I think that when I got the document, I was very impressed. It's well written. Maybe it was a group effort, maybe one person, but it was well done. But after reading the first sentence, the second sentence kind of jumped out at me as if it was insinuating the North Carolina Constitution protects those things, but maybe not the United States. And of course, as lawyers, we all know different, but I think it would make sense to reference both. I think I agree with Ted on that point.
Okay. And that's a point well taken, and we'll sort of wordsmith it to make sure that we are referencing both and then sort of referring to the language in both documents. I think that's appropriate. Before we move on, Catherine, I want to circle back to your observation to make sure I'm wondering whether we're missing something by virtue of the point you are raising. I mean, are you suggesting that there's something that may be missing or something that may be viewed as objectionable if it is somehow viewed as the state bar speaking for the counselors? I want to make sure I understand the point of your observation.
So the point that I was, when I initially read it, and I like it, I have no issue with it. My question was, does there need to be a statement? Because one of the things that, and I think Marcy has hit on this several times as well as I have, that diversity also with regards to the state bar includes diversity of practice, like there's sort of other pieces.
Yep.
And so that's what I was trying to figure out, if that need to be added or if that wasn't appropriate because of who the audience was going to be. And I think based on your answer, what I'm taking away from that is making those changes wouldn't be appropriate to the audience. Does that make sense? Maybe not. You're giving me that look.
I'm thinking through it.
I don't think so. If I could jump in while you're thinking.
All right.
I don't think it's necessary in this particular sense, even though that is true, what you're saying.
Right.
We do keep that in mind. But this particular statement is geared more towards the social, racial, ethnicity, gender, all of that of all the members, and then a statement to the public. So it's a statement at the initial question was, who is our audience? It's a statement to all our members. Pretty much the first part is a reminder of us having to abide by the U.S. Constitution and the North Carolina Constitution. And it reminded me, funny sidebar, I thought of every time I hear that oath, it makes me cringe when we hear somebody say demean myself. But that all of that is a reminder of all of that stuff. And then it's an encouragement and an acknowledgement that we see diversity, equity, inclusion as very important things that we are going to take a intentional effort to make sure we have, you know what I mean? And we cultivate.
Right. And like I said, I don't, that's why I wanted to know the audience. Sort of long and short, I mean, your answer and everyone's answer about essentially who the audience was and where the statement was coming from came back and sort of nipped my thought of whether or not you add other aspects into diversity. So with that, that was the only sort of initial feedback item I had. And so you answered that question. So I don't know that I have any concerns with the statement. I mean, I do think that to get this through, everybody is going to be a little difficult, but I don't think that should stop us. And,
Right. Agreed. We will not please everybody. And some of us know folks in particular that will be jumping up and down about some of the language in this document, and we'll deal with it as best as we can.
I personally think that those people that will jump up and down are reminders to us why we need a statement like this. So just want to throw that out there.
Fair enough. Others, Marcy, I see your hand. Go right ahead.
Hi, I think I know where Catherine is, because when we first started this subcommittee, there was discussions about how the State Bar as an agency could help to encourage lawyers from small firms, different practice areas, women, a lot of different discussions about how to get more diversity in a lot of respects involved in the work of the State Bar. And it seems like throughout the process, we've sort of kind of gotten away from that. And I'm okay with that. I mean, I like the statement. I'm like Catherine, I have nothing, I think it's great. But I think that when we first started, I think there were discussions about a more broader discussion of diversity in terms of trying to get more different backgrounds, different people, the way you look, the way, what kind of practice you are, small town, big town, how to get more small town lawyers maybe on some committees and some, to kind of get diversity of thought in a lot of different ways. So I think that's what Catherine, I may be wrong, Catherine, I'm not trying to speak for you, and that's kind of, be honest with you, I think I've struggled with that a little bit too, because I kind of feel like we sort of have forgotten that piece of it. And maybe that's what this subcommittee wants to go back to issues with. But I think that's what she's talking about.
And we're specifically talking about now what we have or have not included as a diversity characteristic in this statement. You mean, for example, should we have geographic diversity in there? Should we have age in there? Is that what we're referring to now, Catherine and Marcy?
I don't really know. I'm just saying that, diversity is such a
Great.
Big word. It's a very, very broad, a very broad word.
Well, go right ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, you got diversity encompasses characteristics that make each of us unique. Okay.
Including.
It says including, and it doesn't say but not limited to, but I'm just wondering, is there room in there yeah.
Well, go right ahead. I've got an observation, but I want to hear from others first on this point, if others have thoughts on it. Who's getting ready to speak? I can hear somebody.
It's me
Okay.
probably still.
Go ahead.
I just want to say that just in my experience, like even being on grievance, it's been really helpful to have diversity of thought when it comes to practice areas. For example, when you're trying to decide if somebody has violated a rule, because, I know there's been some really good discussions, and a lot of the lawyers that, maybe are in bigger firms and don't do family law, for example, they would think that what the lawyer did or didn't do was not acceptable, but yet once they heard the context and what we deal with on a daily basis, they understood. So the idea of the state bar having diversity in a lot of different ways is important. So anyway, I'll hush.
Todd, can I speak to the
Sure.
list a little bit?
Absolutely.
And I think what we're really talking about, or what we're trying to hone in on, I think some things we can change. We can change where we live geographically. We can change what area of law we practice. We can change the size of the firm in which we practice. So I think what the subcommittee is trying to decide is, should the list be those things that the group thinks are not easily changeable, or do we want to include other demographic information about a person that may or may not change over the course of their career?
Can I just say along those lines, then age needs to be put in there. No, I've not heard of a way you can change that, but I like the delineation. I think that helps me understand, why we may not be inclined to further define diversity, or sort of put the including to include those things that are very difficult to change. I think that at least helps me, but I would just say we may want to add age in there.
Okay, that's a good observation. Others? All right, I'll give you one thought for the hopefully this will stir some discussion. One of the things that we often do, at least in my firm and in the industry, according to peer firms that we talk to, is try to see if we restrict the various categories to those that are considered protected categories, for example, under the EEOC type definition. And I think I'm no expert in that area, but I think all of the categories that we have listed there, Carmen, you and Leonor, correct me if I'm wrong, are protected categories under federal law, I think, at least now, based on some of the latest decisions out of the Supreme Court. And obviously, I think age would be appropriately added to that category, Catherine, to be sure. So I'm not troubled by broadening this, but I think the notion, at least in some respects, has been if you limit the categories to those that are considered and recognized as protected under federal law, then you are somewhat maybe shielding yourself from some successful challenges. You get challenges nonetheless, but if you list protected categories, at least you have some rational basis for saying these categories are the ones that are listed. I don't think, for example, geographic diversity is a protected category anywhere. But I agree with you 100%. One of the most valuable things to me has been, somebody said, I'm from a big law firm, but I've learned so much from folks who really practice law every day, which some would say don't include me, but the folk who wears all the different hats, those are the ones that I admire the most, quite frankly. And so geographic diversity is certainly something that I absolutely agree, but it's not a protected category. So that's one way of maybe trying to decide on what we ultimately end up with. I agree that age should be in there, and I think there's a consensus that age should be in there. I'm not sure what else we need to include that would be considered a protected category. And I see Mr. Silverstein has finally decided to join us. John, welcome. Yes, sir.
As the oldest member of this subcommittee, I do not at all object to age being included, but I think something to keep in mind is that, at least in the past with respect to the state bar, we've been overrepresented in terms of age. We usually think of age in an inclusive from an inclusive standpoint as including older people. Actually, from the state bar's perspective, we do a worse job of including younger people. So I think that really what we need to do is at least when we think about age and when we talk about age from a state bar perspective, we need to think about younger lawyers and law students, not just older lawyers who are overrepresented like me.
Okay. And I think somebody I totally agree with that. I think somebody made maybe it's Catherine who made the observation that age really is something you can't change. You're just going to get older every minute, quite frankly. So I agree that it should be in there to be sure. And I think there's a consensus that we ought to include it. And I suspect that we will in the next draft. Other observations, comments? Dorothy? Yes.
I just want to add a little more to the discussion that what Catherine, you just pointed out about certain, and what I think it was you and Ted talked about certain things, or Leonore talked about there being certain things that can't be changed. And I do agree that I believe that is where this committee started. This focus was about those particular items, not to say that diversity of the, having age being a part of it definitely should be a part of it. But the diversity in the small firm, large firm, all of that stuff. But I just want to add that in my research in all of this and preparing for in other ways, there are 4 different types of diversity. And that what you spoke about is included in that internal diversity. So you have the internal diversity, external diversity, organizational diversity, and then worldview diversity. And all of those different things include different things, different types of diversity. If the statement that is presented pretty much includes those things in it, right? Because those different types of diversity is what the goal of an organization, one of the goals of an organization should be to encompass all of those different types of diversity. And I thought this committee's focus was about the state bar as an organization, one for its members and then for the public itself. And the public itself being, again, the members, meaning our lawyers and the general public. So the general public and our lawyers, especially those persons from those different groups who have been underrepresented or have not had the best equality or equity and all of that good stuff, those are the folks that we're really trying to include and include more and diversify with. And so those are going to be the folks that this type of statement is going to speak to the most. It's going to say to those folks, or to everyone really, right? But especially to those folks, that we as an organization see this as so important that we want to include it in all of our materials and it be a part of our fabric. That when you all think of the state, when people think of the state bar, they know that this is important to us as an organization. And I know I've said it so many times, but there are so many lawyers, we can just start with lawyers that don't believe that that is the case. They don't believe that the state bar is diversified in any way and that there's any equity or equality even when it comes to all different types of things. And one example could be the way a lot of people have this notion that these trust account audits are not equitable in any way, that they are, I could go on, but I just want to throw that out there and just, give that tidbit more of information. And just because I've done a lot of research in this for other organizations that I've worked on diversity and inclusion statements. And when we talked about this before, and I asked the question at the last meeting about whether do we have the funds for a designated person, I specifically asked about a DEI, and that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you want to definitely, have the goal of looking at all of them. And I'll end with us looking at a statement like this does not mean in any way that we would not still strive to have diversity in other ways, meaning small firm, large firm, different areas of North Carolina and all. It doesn't exclude those things. It's just that this particular statement is focusing on these areas.
Yes, John.
I agree with all of the suggested changes so far. And I did have a suggestion for a small edit in the language, which I think is terrific. But at the end, it says it has the word commits. And I think it might be stronger and more appropriate if we change that to is committed, so that it's an ongoing function rather than something we're going to start doing now. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Others? Because we're talking about wordsmith and the language now, and I have no objection to what John has suggested. Any other thoughts with respect to that particular change? Okay.
I agree.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other suggestions with respect to the categories? Because one thing I have gone back and forth about raising, and I'm thinking that maybe in light of this discussion, I ought to go ahead and raise it. Any other thoughts on the types of or categories that might be added to the language we have if we're going to add age? There's a suggestion that we consider things like geographic diversity and things of that nature, which we will certainly study. But any other suggestions with respect to the categories now? All right. One of the things those of you who know me, I'm sort of a stickler for trying to get consistency. And as I was reading through this and other documents, one thing I noted that impacts this, I think, maybe not, but it certainly addresses the consistency concern I have. As we all know, there's a proposal now that we amend the preamble. And looking at the preamble language, it has categories as well that we are recommending that we insert into the preamble. My thought is, if we're going to amend the preamble and if that carries, the language in our diversity statement perhaps ought to be consistent. And I wanted to raise that to this group. And you have in front of you the categories that may well end up in a proposed diversity statement, including age and maybe others. But the preamble without those of you who may not have it in front of you, I've got it here. And it says basically, regardless of a person's race, sex, national origin, religion, age, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, and socioeconomic status. Obviously, we've got 4 categories that are not included in our proposed statement. Nationality, national origin, age. Well, we have age. Well, we have age now. So we don't have national origin. We don't have marital status. We don't have socioeconomic status. And Leonore and Carmen, correct me if I'm omitting something. And right now, our statement says ethnicity. The preamble does not use the word ethnicity.
And I just put the language of each of those in the chat if people want to look at them.
So the question I want to raise with this subcommittee is, do we obviously have no control over the preamble because that's not our space. But perhaps does this discussion, raise some issue about the need to try to reconcile the two, and maybe not. Maybe we just proceed. But it seems like if we're going to adopt a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, perhaps we want it to be consistent with what's in the preamble to the Code of Professional Responsibility. Obviously, the diversity statement, unless Alice tells me I'm wrong, would not be a part of the code. It would be the bar's diversity statement. And so do we want our diversity statement to be consistent with the preamble, assuming it is passed? I would sort of think that we might want to take a look at whether they ought to be consistent.
My
Thought?
gut reaction to that is that it should either be consistent or more encompassing, but not less.
The statement should be consistent with the preamble, you're saying?
Or more encompassing, so
More.
including more categories than the preamble language, but not less categories.
Okay, I take that point. Okay.
And so I have some other, in another statement that I helped create, we also included language at the end, I think, that said, and other characteristics. So it allowed for other characteristics and experiences.
Well,
It
that's
kind of had that all encompassing.
yes.
You know
Well,
what I mean?
that's one of the reasons we tried to use the word including and not define them in our statement. And some folk would say including but not limited to. I'm not sure we need that. If we simply say including, that means that it's not an exhaustive list, at least in my view.
Right.
But we can focus on that too. I want to get some thoughts on whether the reconciling the statement with the preamble language and what folks think about that. And maybe I don't know, maybe I don't know where the preamble is right now, other than what stage of approval it's in versus what we're doing right now. Thoughts on that that comment I just made about one including certain things that the other one does not?
I agree. Todd, I agree with you. I do think there needs to be some consistency there. Certainly. And I think that the preamble is out for comment, and I don't know if we've gotten any or not. Alice would know the answer to that. I bet we've gotten a lot. I've actually am anxious to see what those comments are. But I think it makes good sense to make those, to at least include, as Dorothy says, everything that's in the preamble. It doesn't mean we can't add to it, but
Right.
yeah.
Okay, Carmen has put a note in the box that we should probably put included but not limited to.
No, that's not a serious comment. I'm sorry, Todd. That was a grammarian's commentary.
Oh, I didn't.
Not substantive.
I didn't get to the bottom of it. Okay. So there's some notion that the two ought to be consistent, and so is there some suggestion that perhaps we, in addition to adding age to our statement, that we add the other categories that we now find in the preamble that has been apparently approved at some level, since it is now out for comment? Thoughts? I know, I think Marcy said she thinks that they ought to be consistent. Others?
I think ideally they should be consistent. I guess my question is, if it's out for comment, then obviously what's in the preamble is at least subject to be revised further. So maybe something that at the end of the process or later in the process, there's some kind of reconciliation. But I think it would be ideal if they were consistent.
Hey, Alice, that's a great, thanks, Ted. Alice, you may have answered this before. Is this proposed statement going to have to be put out for comment as well?
No, if it's essentially the council saying this is going to be our policy,
Yeah.
it's not a rule. It's not an official rule of the organization, so we don't have to go through the rulemaking process.
Okay, good. Okay. So then we could, based on what you're saying, we could very easily decide, if we wanted to, not saying that we are, as a subcommittee, recommend that the statement contain essentially what's already in the preamble. We could, if that's what we wanted, we could make that recommendation to the Issues Committee, Alice?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. All right, perfect. Other thoughts on the consistency issue? Because I want to, I mean, we're going to go back and revise. This is great discussion, great input. We're going to go back and come up with another draft for your consideration, but we want to make sure that as best as we can, we get as close to where the subcommittee may want to be in a position to approve a proposed diversity statement. Others? All right. Yeah, other question I want to raise with the subcommittee is the last sentence. Does specifically the phrase into its operations and mission. Any observations, comments on that language? Not that I have any, I'm just raising it because we're sort of looking at every sentence of the statement, which is exactly what I want to do. I want to make sure that everybody's looked at every sentence. Any concern once we have, assuming we make and approve John's suggested change to the word commits, any other concerns about the last sentence, the way it reads, the meaning, how you interpret it?
I see that as one of the most important parts of the statement because it's saying this is what we are recognizing all these great things, what these things mean, and this is what we're going to do about it. I mean, that's the action part of it, which is the part that I really love. So.
Others? Thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think if we took that sentence out, then I would be much less excited about the statement. There has to be some follow through to implement what we say we believe in.
Okay. And keeping in mind structurally, we're talking about inserting, if I understood it correctly, before that sentence, a sentence that in some respects defines equity, since that is now going to be part of the statement as well, maybe part of the title. Am I understanding that correct as well? Yes, okay.
Yes, sir.
Great, okay. Okay. All right, what else have I missed? I'm counting on you guys to help me get this right or close to right.
I would like to get clarification from the subcommittee. Dorothy said consistency between the preamble, but not less than what's in the preamble. And Marcy mirrored that. I'm unsure of where the subcommittee stands. Is the subcommittee, let's start with just what's in the preamble, or merge the two and make sure that nothing that's in the preamble is left out of what's in this draft statement?
The latter.
Okay.
Let's merge them, and then we're fine. I think me and Marcy both said that we're fine with it being more inclusive in our statement than what's in the preamble. So the preamble should be the bare minimum.
Thank you.
Yes.
The preamble, okay. Any other comments in that regard, on that statement? Those observations? All right, the preamble, as I pointed out, excludes the word or omits the word ethnicity. And in terms of being more inclusive potentially, if we inserted the word ethnicity into our statement, it would be broader than the preamble. Any
My
concern?
my recollection of the discussion that took place in the subcommittee that promulgated the preamble is not that anyone had any opposition to including the word ethnicity, but that we weren't, or the subcommittee members weren't entirely sure what it added, like if it really added another dimension to the words that were already in that list. So I think that's why it was omitted, but it may very well have a distinct meaning. And so I don't see that there's any, it's not going to hurt to add it, right?
Okay. We can sort of do a little bit of research and a little snooping to see whether or not a lot of these statements, not that it will dictate what we do, but whether it does add anything, and if it doesn't add anything, then I'm certainly not in favor of adding words that really don't move the needle, so to speak. So we will take a look at the use of the word ethnicity and whether or not it becomes part of the proposed statement language, realizing that the preamble language is the baseline, is what I've heard. Is there sort of a general consensus around that concept, what we're talking about today, guys?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. That's sort of what we wanted to talk about today. I don't want to short circuit any discussion, and I really want, as I said before, candor in terms of, and I know we don't have some committee members here, but candor in terms of where we are, transparency, and the willingness to maybe send something that along the lines that we have here as modified based on today's discussion as potentially our recommendation to the full ethics committee as a statement to be potentially adopted by the state bar. And so that's my mission here, is to try to get us comfortable with something that we can ideally, we may not get there, but my preference is to do things in a uniform fashion and a unanimous fashion if possible. But if we don't get there, we don't. So I'm trying to make sure that the subcommittee has been heard and that we have incorporated all of your comments into the next iteration of the statement. All right. The next, just so we'll move on from that unless someone else has any other comments about that. The only other thing I wanted to remind the committee of, and then maybe give you maybe 5 minutes back, is the next steps. I mean, this was one of our charges here, and I'm not sure that it started out as one of the charges, but it's one now, and it's good work in my estimation. Next steps are to start drafting, and we started thinking about those, the recommendations that we are going to ultimately make to the issues committee. And we have as a baseline, I think, the recommendations that the LAP board made to the officers, and that the officers responded to. Those will be some of the recommendations we will be considering and submitting to you for consideration. We may or may not submit all of them to you, but our hope is to be able to get a draft of some recommendations to this group, either ideally before, so you can sort of think about it before you arrive, like we did with the statement, that you can think about the proposed recommendations before we arrive in Asheville, and in Asheville get to work on discussing those recommendations, maybe thinking about approving the ones that we may get comfortable with and sort of rejecting the ones that we may be uncomfortable with, and sort of talking about where we ultimately need to go in terms of our final recommendations, but I want us to ideally be able to make some good progress in July in terms of trying to get to some recommendations, a set of recommendations that we can leave there with a good view of where we're headed, and then we can turn a revision of those discussions that we have in Asheville into another set of recommendations, and then try to see what sort of consensus we can reach around some or all of the recommendations. We may not get there, but that's sort of what we'd ideally like to do, subject to what Leonore and Carmen are getting ready to tell me is possible between now and then. Carmen, Leonore?
You summed it up about right, Todd.
All right, and I'll go ahead and say it. We owe Carmen and Leonore a great debt of gratitude in drafting this statement. As usual, they've done their outstanding work, and so we're grateful to them. And I am confident they're going to do their excellent work with respect to the recommendations as well.
Thank you, Todd. Very kind of you.
Thanks to you both. That's all I had, guys, for the good of the order. But we got 5 minutes left, and any comments, observations, or things that you think about once we hang up, make sure you send me an email. So somebody raise it. Mary Lee, that's my, okay. I'm sorry. I missed it. Okay. That's all I had, guys. Anything else anybody wants to raise for the good of the order? Hearing none, we are adjourned.